We got a very interesting update that is coming out here. The Las Vegas Raiders general manager John Spytek was recently seen at the Boise State Pro Day, of course, analyzing and scouting running back Ashton Jeanty. And I want to talk about what this means for the Raiders as we kind of go forward. Because there's a real chance the Raiders with the 6th overall pick end up taking Ashton Jeanty. A position that a lot of people are kind of hesitant with taking. But it is a prospect that's a lot different than the average running back. Right, you can get really, really good running backs like Nick Chubb in the 2nd round, guys that have a really, really long and solid career, but you're not getting Saquon Barkley or Adrian Peterson unless you're taking these guys in like the top 10 to 15 picks. And Ashton Jeanty could be that caliber running back. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I watched this guy's pro day, and Ashton Jeanty looks absolutely crazy explosive out there. The guy's quick, he's fast, he's explosive. The footwork is absolutely incredible. And the tape definitely backs all that up too, right? What you see with this pro day is kind of what you get out there on tape. And it's why he's a top 10 prospect coming out at a position that you're not generally taking in the top 10. Running backs, guards, linebackers, you're not taking these guys in the top 10 unless they're absolutely different. And Ashton Jeanty is definitely absolutely different. And Ashton Jeanty is apparently being scouted not only by the Raiders, but it's more than that. The Raiders took this guy out to dinner. This came out by the Takeover Sports podcast who put this tweet out. This isn't by any means like a huge Twitter account. Guy only has 607 followers. But this guy's putting it out there saying that his roommate was serving Ashton Jeanty and the Raiders general manager at a restaurant she works at. So the Raiders took Ashton Jeanty out after he essentially had his pro day. The tweet was tweeted at 3:40 Pacific Standard Time, which is almost 5 o'clock in Boise. So, obviously, the Raiders, right after that pro day, right after that workout, the Raiders wanted to meet with this guy and have a private dinner. And we have to realize how many other teams requested Ashton Jeanty. How many other teams did he potentially turn down to come to the Raiders, right? So for the Raiders and Ashton Jeanty to actually meet after that pro day, there's a real chance that the Raiders are looking to draft Ashton Jeanty. Right? You're not taking this guy to dinner unless you 100% were bought into that. Right? And of course, I'm sure the Raiders will meet with multiple other prospects and have dinner with prospects. They'll end up actually drafting some of those guys as well, right? Ashton Jeanty is obviously coming out from Boise State. Really, really like what this guy has shown. There is one other prospect that is at Boise State that I think will end up getting drafted. Ahmad Hassan had, I think, the most sacks in college football. Not this most recent season, but the season before that. I believe he had like 20 sacks or something crazy like that. Don't know, quote me on the exact number. But the guy is another NFL draft prospect. So although Spytek is obviously there, and we know, Jeanty's probably the guy they're mostly scouting. Ahmad Hassan is also another guy that is a player that the Raiders could potentially draft. If not, he's a priority UDFA. He's pretty solid on tape. High effort type of player. He's athletic as well. I think he's definitely going to end up making the NFL. He won't be a superstar player, but I think he'll be a productive football player as well. So he's another guy that the Raiders could have potentially been scouting. Outside of those two guys, I don't really know if Boise State has any other guy that I'd say is a draftable player, at least this season. But it is also important to kind of note, right? John Spytek obviously met with Ashton Jeanty, scouted Ashton Jeanty. There's a real chance the Raiders are considering drafting this guy. Because general manager is not going to a pro day for one player unless he's 100% certain. Especially the general manager, right? It's different if you send a scout to the Boise State pro day. That could make sense, right? If you send that scout to kind of check it out. But you're not sending your general manager unless he was 100% committed. Plus, I believe Ohio State also had their pro day yesterday. So the Raiders skipped out on the Ohio State pro day to go to the Boise State pro day, right? So it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. Very, very interesting. And I'll just give you guys my quick thoughts and opinions on Ashton Jeanty as a prospect. I do hesitate with taking running backs. In my opinion of that will not change. I also do think, if you have a good running back, you should definitely pay that running back. But if you don't pay that running back, you got to draft the guy. You got to draft the guy in the top 2 to 3 rounds. Otherwise, you're going to be in what the Raiders were last season, right? They're in absolutely a terrible spot with that running back position. Zamir White, they're like, he's the RB1. I hesitated with that. You guys know this if you guys watch this channel. I was not sold on Zamir White. I felt like the year prior to this past season, he had a couple of really, really long runs, which kind of skewed his numbers a little bit. And then I felt like the Raiders were kind of going in with the wrong approach. I didn't disagree with not paying Josh Jacobs. I think it made sense if you wanted to move off of him. He's a running back. He's played 5 years in the NFL. But you had to draft the running back, and the Raiders obviously did not draft one this past season. And maybe it was the right decision not to draft one, right? There weren't that many good running backs that even came out this past season. The first 3 or 4 running backs selected did absolutely nothing last year. The best running back was probably Bucky Irving, and he ended up going in like the 4th round to the Bucks, right? John Spytek ended up drafting him. You know, if you don't want to pay running backs, that's okay. But if you don't pay a running back, you got to draft one. You can't go in without a plan, and I feel like the Raiders last year learned that if you're not going to pay a guy, you have to have a plan, and they obviously didn't. They ended up going in with Alexander Madison and Zamir White. That did not work out. This year, the Raiders aren't taking that same approach. We've seen Spytek draft these guys, right? We've seen him draft, in fact, multiple running backs, right? I believe they took Rashad White, I think is his name. I believe he was like a 3rd-round pick. Don't quote me on it, but I believe he was a pretty high pick for the Bucks. They obviously drafted Leonard Fournette at some point as well. And then most recently, obviously, Bucky Brooks, running back, or Bucky Irving, I think. Bucky Brooks, I think the analyst. Bucky Irving, the running back. And, you know, I think there's a chance the Raiders end up taking a running back. And I'm okay with drafting Ashton Jeanty, right? He's a playmaker. He's explosive. You want to try to get your offense to be better with the best talent out there. And that's how you're going to win football games, obviously, right? But the thing with running backs is you also have to realize that, you know, if you take Ashton Jeanty, let's say over a guy like, you know, let's say Travis Hunter's on the board, or let's say it's Armin Membao, right, out of Missouri. Let's say you take Ashton Jeanty and he plays for 6 years, and then year 7 he starts to kind of decline, and year 8 he's declining, year 9 he's declining, and then Armin Membao ends up becoming a top 10 tackle, and you know year 7 comes around when the running back starts to decline. This guy's in his prime. He gets better in year 8. He gets even better in year 9. He plays, you know, on for 13, 14 years. You know, that's the potential other side of it, right? That you have to realize that an offensive tackle is going to be always way more important than a running back. A wide receiver oftentimes is more important than your running back. But I do think that, you know, if you take Tetra McMillan and he's an average wide receiver, that's a mistake. Then Ashton Jeanty was the best running back in the NFL potentially, right? So I'm okay with taking Ashton Jeanty. The Raiders just got to make sure they have that offensive line under control. I don't think this offensive line unit that we have right now is good enough to have success. But maybe the Raiders have a plan, right? Maybe the Raiders are actually going out there with the idea that, hey, there are guys that are kind of available that we're going to actually go out there and potentially bring in. We're going to potentially draft. So the Raiders have 30 visits they can essentially have. And Will Campbell has apparently confirmed that he has a visit that is set up with the Las Vegas Raiders later on this week. So Jordan Reed said that offensive lineman Will Campbell has confirmed to the SEC network that he will not participate in the pro day today. Keep in mind, this was yesterday, so John Spytek obviously skipped the LSU pro day to go to the Boise State pro day. But with that, Jordan Reed goes on, and Will Campbell's going to stand on his numbers from the scouting combine. He's already visited the Patriots and will visit the Raiders later this week. If you guys remember, we talked about this in yesterday's video. The Raiders met with Charles Grant, who I love Charles Grant's tape, man. Physical, phenomenal football player. But Grant is a left tackle in college that could play on the inside in the NFL. And what's interesting about Will Campbell is I think that's kind of the same thing with Will Campbell. He's a left tackle in college. And I know Will Campbell disagrees with this, right? He's been kind of trending on Twitter a little bit if you guys have not heard. Campbell totally disagrees with the narrative that his arms are too short. But Will Campbell's another guy that could go from left tackle to the inside. And if you guys remember, John Spytek literally told us this in the past, that he loves taking tackles and putting them at the guard position. I forget exactly who it was, but the Buccaneers did the same thing. I believe it was the NDSU lineman that they took. I think it was Cody Mock, or it could have been Luke Gedicke. I know they drafted both of those guys. One of those guys ended up on the inside. One of them ends up playing right guard. I think it's Cody Mock. But basically, they drafted a guy in the 2nd round who was a right tackle in college. He ends up going to right guard in the NFL. And he's a really, really good right guard as well. And again, Spytek told us this is the approach they prefer with their guards. And bringing in Charles Grant, bringing in Will Campbell, to me, means the Raiders are actually valuing these guys. Now, the thing with Will Campbell is if the Raiders take him with the 6th overall pick to play guard, that's absolutely garbage value, right? That is the worst pick you could potentially have. Now, if you think he can play tackle, that's completely different. I would take him at that point with the 6th overall pick. If you think he can play tackle, I don't think he can. I would not personally draft him with the 6th overall pick. but maybe the Raiders feel like he could actually be in there in the second round, right? I want to make it a point of emphasis. Oftentimes, we hear like, hey, this guy should be a first round pick. Like, this guy's a top 5 pick, right? I'll use Tetro McMillan as an example. Sheduer Sanders is probably a better example. Oftentimes we hear, hey, Sheduer Sanders should be a top 5 pick. And if you start mocking him like, hey, he's, we'll put him to the Steelers with pick 20. Or, hey, maybe the Giants get him in the second round. People are going to go crazy and say that's not true. That's not going to happen. But oftentimes what they're not realizing is these guys being mocked does not mean that's where they're going to end up going. We had this happen with Malik Willis, where people are like, he's a top 5 pick. We've had this happen with Will Levis, top 5 pick, right? These guys absolutely just dropped in the draft. DeJuan Jones, another guy that recently came out that comes to mind. People are like, this is a top 10 pick. He was a 4th round pick, right? I think this happens oftentimes more than people realize. We have guys like Will Campbell that are projected as top 5 picks, but the NFL might value them as guards. So they might not go in the top 5. Right? There's a chance if Will Campbell is valued as a guard, which again, 32.25-inch arms, I don't think teams are going to value this guy as an offensive tackle. If that's the case, there's a chance he's there in the second round. He'd be a phenomenal pick in the second round. In fact, I would not draft Will Campbell to be a tackle. I just don't, I just don't see it working out. And it's primarily because, there's defensive linemen that are long, and those guys get their hands right into Will Campbell and they long arm him, right? And Will Campbell struggles to shut that down. And the thing with college is not the NFL. In college, Will Campbell plays 2 NFL caliber defensive ends. In the NFL, you're going to play 17 to 30 of those guys over the course of the year, right? You're going to play superstar defensive ends, or superstars in college specifically that come into the NFL. I just don't see him working out as a tackle, but I do like the fact that the Raiders are bringing him in. I would be disappointed if he's the pick with the 6th overall pick. But if you are able to somehow get him in the second round, or maybe the Raiders trade back, right? Maybe there's a chance that Ashton Jeanty and Hunter and Abdul Carter are all off the board, and the Raiders look at it like, we don't want to take whoever's available with the 6th pick. And maybe there's a team like Pittsburgh, or maybe like the Dolphins, that feel like, hey, we want to trade up and we want to get that quarterback. We have a scheming system set up and we think we can make it work. Maybe the Raiders trade back to like pick 20 or 25, and then they take Will Campbell. I'd be okay with that. I think that would make a lot of sense as well. Either way, the Raiders are meeting with multiple tackles that will probably be interior offensive linemen as we go forward. Something Spytek has told us. Let's wrap this video up. Deion Sanders spoke recently with Skip Bayless, and he said something very interesting. And I think the way he said it really made me think, like, what does he mean exactly? I want you guys to listen to this, and then we'll talk about this on the other side.
Sheduer told me, he's talked to me intently about all the visits he's had with all the teams, so I know where his heart is. I know where he wants to go. If it's New York, it's New York. If it's Tennessee, if it's Cleveland, if it's still the Raiders, if it's New Orleans, if it's any of those teams that are seeking a quarterback, I'm happy with it, man, because I know what he's going to do to the organization. I know what he's going to do.
So if you guys listen to exactly what Deion Sanders said, it's kind of interesting what he said in regards to the Raiders. He said if it's New York, if it's Cleveland, Tennessee, if it's still the Raiders, if it's New Orleans, and that he'd essentially be happy with it. I find it interesting the way he said if it's still the Raiders. And to me, that's very, very interesting. What does that mean if it's still the Raiders? Is it that the Raiders had told Deion Sanders that, hey, we're potentially drafting Sheduer Sanders, we're 100% interested in this guy? What does if it's still the Raiders actually mean in regards to Sheduer Sanders getting drafted? Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting if you guys think about this because, and maybe it's because the Raiders brought in Geno Smith, but again, it's also interesting because Cleveland brought in a quarterback, New York has brought in a quarterback, New Orleans has committed to a quarterback. It's interesting nonetheless, right, if it's still the Raiders. I almost feel like maybe, Sheduer has spoken to the Raiders at some point, and maybe someone said something to Sheduer or to Deion Sanders potentially that implies that the Raiders are potentially drafting him. Either way, I do find it interesting, right? There's also a chance that, when you think about Spytek going to the Boise State Pro Day, maybe there's a chance that he just wants someone to jump in front of him to take the running back so he can potentially move down and get Sheduer Sanders, right? Maybe there's some other guys that he's interested in and he wants to potentially trade down for those guys. Either way, I found it interesting what Deion Sanders had to kind of say. Now, I should also just back up really quickly. The entire video right there. Deion Sanders is basically talking about how there were reports that had come out with Sheduer Sanders and how Sanders apparently went to the combine and he had some meetings and he came out of those meetings that he didn't really care, right? He was kind of uninterested. Now, one of the things that we've been hearing a lot with Sheduer this offseason is how uninterested this guy kind of is, right? And it's kind of crazy because coming into like the draft process, right, back in December, January, Sheduer was regarded as like a top 2 pick, if not the number 1 overall pick. And I think pretty much as people started getting the tape and they started really analyzing this guy, people started having some question marks. And I think his stock started to drift downwards a little bit. And then I feel like the East-West Shrine ended up coming. He skipped the Senior Bowl, which is the game he should have probably went to and played in to prove himself as a top 2 or 3 pick. He ends up skipping the Senior Bowl, goes to the East-West Shrine, does not play in it, which is a huge red flag for a lot of people. He goes to the Combine, doesn't throw at the Combine, which, it's debatable if that really matters or not. But then he went to his own pro day and did not throw at his own pro day. Right? Everything Sheduer Sanders has done has basically been to hurt his own stock. And on top of that, we've heard that this guy seems uninterested. This guy doesn't care, or, there's something to this guy's attitude that makes it seem like he thinks he's, above something. And maybe that's not the right words, but people are saying that Sheduer comes off as he feels, and I don't know what the right word is, but it's like, he's coming out here saying, I've already kind of proven myself. I have nothing else to prove. Right, that's the kind of mindset that Sheduer has. Right, that's kind of what some people are saying with him, specifically related to the combine and the interviews and those things. I don't know if any of that's true. Right, I don't know if any of that stuff is true, but I do know that a lot of information does come out at this point. I'll give you guys another example. I mentioned this in a past video, but I heard from a really, really good source that James Pierce Jr., although he's a top 15 pick, he's a top 15 talent. He has anger issues that he apparently cannot control, right? He has some medical, there's something there where he has anger issues that he can't control. And some people are saying teams are just not going to draft this guy. He's going to end up falling way further down than people realize. And the thing is James Pierce is a really, really talented player, but teams in the NFL want professional players and they want guys that are controllable. They want guys that can, take that anger and keep it in and take it out on the other team. They're saying James Pierce is not that guy, right? And they're saying that Pierce might end up falling in around 3 or 4 potentially, right? Which is kind of crazy to think, but, these are the things that we hear that there is substance to them, right? They're not just made up stories. I know we've had stories that are made up at times, right? I think like CJ Stroud had a terrible S2 score or something like that a couple years back. Some things are made up, but then there's some things that are not necessarily made up, right? And we've kind of seen some of these things play out. Jalen Carter's another guy. People are like, does he love football? Does he not? And we've seen this happen multiple times. T'Vondre Sweat last year. People said that, hey, this is the guy that, he'd rather be out partying than putting the effort in to be great. And he was a great player on tape, right? He's a phenomenal player. And he ended up falling into the second round because of it, right? Now, the Titans obviously ended up taking him. I think he had a DUI like 2 weeks after that report had come out, which kind of just tie that report together almost. But we oftentimes hear report, and I think Sheduer Sanders is another guy we're hearing a lot of these things about, that I think there is some substance to it, right? I do think that there is something with Sheduer and just the, just that like almost celebrity mindset, and I don't have much to prove, right? I was at the Hula Bowl and these guys showed up to the Hula Bowl and, they walked into the building and they have like 15 cameras on them. And they're paid for, right? It's not like random people just started recording them. And they walk around like that all day where people just record them. And to me, it's just interesting, right? Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man. Let me know what you guys think, man. Boise State running back might be a target for the Raiders. It'd be an interesting pick. I want to know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.